All right, it looks like we are all live according to the chat box, so I think we are all good to go. So we will get started here. It looks like more people have joined us as well, so thanks all for being here today. Wanted to start out today by acknowledging that today is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. My orange shirt acknowledges that today and every day we're standing with the Indigenous people, and it also allows us to renew our commitment to healing, hope, and reconciliation. And I'd also like to respect and acknowledge Indigenous people, First Nation, Inuit, and the Métis as keepers of the territory upon which we are learning today. So for those who may not know me, my name is Suzanne Paulins, and I'm the Director of Operations and Sport Development with Swimming Canada. And joining me today through this discussion is Dr. Vicki Harber. Vicki is a consultant with Sport for Life and also a retired professor from the University of Alberta. So thanks, Vicki, for joining us today. So we are here today to talk about appropriate athlete development, the ADM, and life skills and mental skills specifically are the pillars that we're going to spend a fair bit of time talking about today. And just through the process of developing the appropriate athlete development and the athlete development matrix, want to acknowledge the Swimming Canada partners that have been really crucial in the development of this material. It certainly hasn't been just Swimming Canada that has created this. It really has been a partnership with all of the provincial sections, the CSCA, as well as Sport for Life, have all been a part of this journey that we've been through over the last many years. And so with that, just wanted to kind of do a review of what have the timelines been and what has this process that we've gone through included. So within the Swimming Canada Athlete Development Matrix, it was 2008 when the Swimming Canada Long-Term Athlete Development Model was launched. And then in 2014-15 is when a review of that long-term athlete development began. And that really was focused or was precipitated by Sport for Life and a review of the overall long-term athlete development strategy. With that work, we started it and we really began with the physical and technical pillars in 2014-15. And then in 2016, there was the competition improvement plan. So you would have seen that through the national meets, and that was a specific outcome of work around the athlete development matrix. In June of 2018, there was another competition improvement plan that was launched and shared with provinces that was more around provincial and developmental events. So what is appropriate for athletes at that level? Then it really became, we felt we were in a really good place from the technical and tactical and the physical development perspective. But what we didn't have were those life and mental skills. And so when I joined Swimming Canada and started this work, it was something really important for me to be able to try and wrap my head around how are we going to present this part of the athlete development matrix. And this is really where Vicki came in from the Sport for Life to help us work through this. So we're going to go through a lot of that work with you, but just wanted to say that was the time frame when we started that work was 2019. By December 2019, we had it done. So we had a fully completed athlete development matrix and also what we were calling appropriate athlete development. And now over the last 16 to 18 months, it's been a rollout of that material, actually almost 2 years, I think, where we've gone and we're trying to share what is the appropriate athlete development, what is the athlete development matrix, and try to make it real for folks. So some of you who have recently done the Swimming 301, the coaches course, some of this material is going to be familiar to you. But I think what I ask you to take away is the conversation that I'm having with Vicki, because she is really an expert in this field in my mind, and has really helped us grow and develop this content. And so she has a lot of really great information to share. We would ask for you to use the chat box as well. So you'll notice Lindsay's just put a note in there. as we're going through this, if you have questions of Vicki, of myself, of the process, of any of the topics that we're covering, really would encourage you and ask you to throw anything in that chat box that you'd like, and we'll try to kind of monitor that as we go and answer questions as we carry on. So with regards on what's been developed, as I mentioned, the competition improvement plans, the national events, the phase 2 of the provincial and developmental meets. We had the appropriate athlete development model overview. So you would have seen some stories that came out on the Swimming Canada page on what is appropriate athlete development. And then we had the 4 athlete development matrices, the 4 pillars. So talking about the physical capacity, the technical, tactical, strategic pillar, the life skills pillar, and the mental skills pillar. When we launched those, we were very tactical about it to try and launch them not all at once, because it's a lot of material, it's a lot of content, and we wanted to do it in a way that would hopefully allow people a little bit more of a bite-sized approach to it. So you would have seen launches that were shared with you with those resources on the learning management system. So the Swimming Canada LMS that we call it, where you register for courses, where all of our e-learning modules are located. All of these resources on the ADM and appropriate athlete development are shared through our learning management system. And what you also might have noticed in the beginning part of this year were the Swim Expert series. So we did the Swim Expert series that were posted to the Swimming Canada YouTube channel that were little bite-sized pieces, again, trying to give more information on here, was this 100-page document, but now here we have a little bit more context around all of the content that was delivered. And Vicki did a session on the life and mental skills. We had Johnny Fuller did the Swim Expert series on the physical capacities, and then I think it was Vince and Mark did the technical capacities. So I think again, just these are ways and things that we've developed in order to help this conversation and provide information to coaches on the athlete development matrix. So when we talk about appropriate athlete development, Swimming Canada made a conscious decision to change this from long-term athlete development to appropriate athlete development. And this was really a purposeful change because long-term, everything is, we look at it long-term, but what's appropriate for that athlete? What's appropriate for a summer or a penny at 14, 15 years old, very different from what it could be for another swimmer, very different from what it could be for a male swimmer. So again, what's appropriate? And so that word of appropriate athlete development really felt right to us. Appropriate athlete development also, it takes everything from that fundamentals, that developmental first in the water swimmer, all the way through to the performance pathway stages of the train to compete and train to win. We also have the performance pathway, the gold medal profile for those that are on that performance track to a podium performance at a world championships or an Olympic, Paralympic Games. We also really wanted in that appropriate athlete development to recognize the place of competitive for life athletes. So where do they fit into that train to compete and train to win that is outside of the performance pathway, but within our club programs likely makes up a really big portion of our club membership. So how and where do the competitive for life athletes fit in, and wanted to really make sure that that was covered. I think the other piece when we think about appropriate athlete development is the recent campaign that Swimming Canada had, the Why Not Swimming. So within those videos, there were a series of 6 videos that were launched over the last couple of weeks. You could really see that full scope of athlete development through those videos, from the developmental fundamental age through to our Olympic and Paralympians, but also to our master swimmers. So you really saw that full development through those videos. So what is the athlete development matrix? And this is where we're going to start to dive in a little bit closer, and we're going to pull in Vicki here as well. But just wanted to kind of talk about the athlete development matrix, that it's a broad roadmap for that development of swimmers. It describes observations, actions, words that we want athletes to portray and demonstrate across each stage of development. But I think what's one of the most important things about this athlete development matrix is that it's a living document. This is always going to be changing. It's never done. And so right now, what we're going to be presenting reflects current evidence, and that's going to evolve over time. And I think as you go through a session like this, as you look at the documents on the learning management system, as you see what evolves in your club and how you can make this real and live in your club, share that feedback with us, because I think we won't know whether it's hit the mark, whether it's doing what it needs to be doing, without that feedback from coaches that are making it real in their programs. So I think that's really, really important. So when we talk about the rollout, as I mentioned, it's that context thing. And we really developed the ADM with the Canadian swimming community because it was wanted by the swimming community. And the ADM is really intended to help provincial technical reps and PSOs further develop clubs, coaches, swimmers in the province. And the ADM is now going to really strongly influence the update that we're looking at, that we're currently starting with regards to the NCCP coach education certification materials. So the ADM is really going to form a big part of that NCCP rewrite that we've started. It's going to be a couple of years for us to get through everything that needs to be done, but the ADM is going to be an anchor in that work, and that's really important. So now, Vicki, I'm going to pull you in and get you to start sharing with us. So Vicki, with your work with Sport for Life, you've worked with a lot of other NSOs and different organizations in the development of their athlete development matrices. As we roll out our own ADM, what have you learned and acquired from your experience that you might be able to share with everyone?
Well, thank you, Suzanne. And it's a real pleasure to be with Swim Ontario. Thank you to Lindsay and Eric for hosting a great platform, and as well to everybody who's listening in. I'd like to echo Suzanne's invitation to provide comments, questions. There's a real importance in our mind around the utility of the information that we're about to share, because if it's not meaningful to you, the likelihood of it having any breath of life beyond today is pretty slim. I'd also like to say I'm coming from Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory, so again, acknowledging First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and really feeling fortunate to be on this day of Truth and Reconciliation, the moment that we can no longer sort of ignore our collective history, again is a sharp reminder of for me about being curious and becoming a learner in another area in my life. So my own learnings, it never stops regardless of how gray the hair gets. So yeah, I would say if we go to that next slide, Suzanne, which shows our the first piece is over time working with Sport for Life, and as an academic as well, we get so fond of content. You know, what's the latest information about how to do things well with athletes, analyzing performance outcomes, and so on. And so there's no shortage of evidence-based information. And yet what I've learned over time, and a very important training for me as an academic and in particular as a consultant, is that content is only as good as the context and with which it comes to life. And what I mean by context, which Suzanne has already started to allude to, is where are you in this country? And I know we're in Ontario speaking to the coaches, but where is your club? What city or district do you live in? Is it a small or a large place? What's your membership? What about your coaches? What about your participants and their families? Everybody's context is different. So we can't simply provide content and have this expectation that it's going to be a cookie cutter approach. And the reckoning of the meaningfulness and importance of context as content then starts to influence process. So with that third one coming up, Suzanne, so knowing we've got a bunch of content, which we're going to talk to some of it today, hear with your ear, with your own context. So that question that you have is that when ideas are posed, you could ask yourself, how might this roll out here, or this might not fit, or this is going to really go well. So when then you start considering process can have various arms and legs to it. So I've got 3 listed here just as examples about how do we implement this thing? And my goodness, if there's one thing I've learned is that simply because you come out with any kind of shiny brochure or document or strategic plan, implementation, holy smokes, just the thought of making it real is such a, I think, an ongoing challenge. And yet through quality relationships and partnerships, the workload is dissipated. So implementation, it can also influence assessment. How do you know if some of these new ideas are working? Are you going to look at it from the athlete perspective? Are you going to look at it from coach development, coach progression? It can also influence communication. How do you speak to your members? Is there a portal in which individuals have to go to? Is there a newsletter? Are there regular moments in which there's a gathering of diverse folks to have a conversation? So this idea of we're not leaving the content behind, but content is really impacted by context that you're in, and then consider that process. So that's been, I would say, one of my biggest learnings. And then if we float into now, in fact, is that okay to start with Suzanne, and where should we go now?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think, the next slide that we had was just around this big word that we've been living in for the last 18 months.
I know. And you're right. And this is such a classic. I mean, it's right in our face still, is COVID-19. Talk about context. Now, this is context that has affected each and every one of you. Yet, what is that impact at your own local level is your context. And it's different. It's not better than, it's not worse than, it's just different. And when you really understand your own environment, your own landscape, the idea of implementing content or new ways of doing things becomes a little bit more manageable. You have a few more arms and legs to it. So, I mean, and again, and I've heard some other speakers talk to the impact of COVID on sport in general. I mean, swimming, my goodness, how long were swimming pools closed for? I mean, what do you do when your core environment is removed? So these are the kinds of things around context that have meaning around what are you going to do with new content. And as I say, you can have the most sparkly, glistening new evidence, and yet if you don't have a good grasp of your own context and environment, the chances of it coming to life are less than stellar. So that's that's again sort of that key point around context.
Perfect. Thanks, Vicki. And I think next where I'd love to dive into is a little bit more around the pillars of the athlete development matrix. So when we think about this 4-corner model of the athlete development matrix, can you talk to us a little bit more about these 4 pillars, what they mean and how they're used right now, and just kind of a little bit more from your perspective?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is something that, again, I think I've done with the various kinds of work that I've done with national sport organizations. This one has really, really tickled my fancy and made me go down extraordinary rabbit holes. with great delight, I might say. And I think that's one of the upsides of retirement is I have time to spend down these rabbit holes, and hence sort of learning much more about aspects of athlete development and how this appropriateness that you speak to, Suzanne, developmentally appropriate. Are we doing the right things at the right time with our youngsters as they have their athletic and performance journey? So Sport for Life put out an athlete development matrix some years ago, and we're actually in the midst of doing an update on this one. But the idea of these 4 pillars, which are shown here, this isn't unique to Sport for Life. This is all sports have various forms of pillars. And if we think about what these 4 portray around physical capacity, starting in the top left, psychological or mental skills, swinging around to the bottom right, life skills, and finally, our technical, tactical, and strategic skills. So these are the major components of athlete development. And if you think about those pillars, we've often, Suzanne, remember we talked about, imagine a table, with 4 legs typically. And if you have a 4-legged table, it's nice and sturdy. They're all of equal length and equal strength. But if you were to shorten one of those legs or entirely remove it, that table would be incredibly unstable and not very reliable for the purpose in which it was intended. So athlete development, and you can actually populate those 4 arrows for me, Suzanne. And these arrows, what I've tried to allude to based on their thickness, is that coaches, what we often focus on are the technical and tactical skills. And again, I don't know swimming nearly as well as anybody who I'm speaking to right now. So you will, I'm not pretending to be an expert in that, but across all sports, what we do with our youngsters when they first get into sport is really focus on technical, tactical pieces, sometimes strategic pieces as well. Next of importance, we look at and often get glammed by physical capacities. So we often get really excited about the early mature, one who is taller and stronger than their other age-matched peers. And so these are the athletes who are often selected for potential training and see where they're going to go, because at that particular moment in their time, they are bigger and stronger, and yet we aren't patient enough to wait a little bit longer. But those are the kind of the 2 ones we often focus on. And again, I'll remind you, if you have thoughts or comments on this, please start populating that chat box. I'd love to hear from you. Then on the right-hand side, we'll see that those green arrows get progressively thinner and more dweeby looking, because in our sports system, we often ignore those psychological mental skills beyond perhaps something about more encouraging or using language such as visual imagery, positive thinking, and so on, and yet rather superficial. And then in that lower right-hand corner, can you barely see it? I hope you can barely see it, because that was my intention, is this area around life skills, around brain development, cognition, and social-emotional learning. Now, I do want to claim right now, my training is as an exercise physiologist, reproductive endocrinologist, and so I want to say this was not my primary academic endeavor, but holy smokes, in my work with female athletes, the idea of social circumstance and behavioral science was impossible to ignore. So when this literature started to bubble, and I dove right in and I thought, oh my goodness, talk about an important piece. And when we started to discuss with our national sport organizations, finding out when the wheels fall off or things really don't go as well as everybody thought they would, in which of these quadrants do things usually trip us up? And in many, if not most circumstances, those obstacles arose out of that lower right-hand corner of undeveloped or deficits in life skill development, such as making poor decisions, at a moment in time for that young athlete, it's important to make the right decision. Social connections, sometimes being unable to adapt to new teammates, new circumstances, new coaches, new environments, that adaptability. And so this gave us much encouragement about looking more into these life skills. So that's kind of the explanation of that framework. A little bit long-winded there, Suzanne, so I got my juices going on that one.
You did, but no, that was good. And I think where it takes us on that, four-legged table is the next slide, right? That I think just is that building block that that shows the importance of all four.
Yes, yes. And so through my learning, and this is one of these, my work with Suzanne was so rewarding because it was this idea of being able to sort of throw some things at Suzanne, saying, does this make sense? And which not sort of helped to establish something that is simple. And you kind of got to go quite deep before things can get simple. And so this graphic that we played with was, instead of putting technical, tactical skills at those first experiences for our youngest participants in our sport, that really the most important piece that they need to have are these life skills. And the life skills, as that strong foundation, then sets the stage for the building of mental skills. And if those are done well and attended to within that young athlete's life and environment, then the technical and tactical skills, along with those physical skills, are going to be developed to the best of their possible potential. So that's what this graphic was trying to allude to. And it wasn't at the expense of, so it's not like life skills dominate and you don't do anything technical. No. This is about interweaving and the interconnections between all of these. And this is, again, in trying to create metaphors, is the idea of a tapestry. And so that if you imagine every young athlete that we have in front of us is a bit of like a tapestry. So the particular threads that get woven together, the different colors, the frame that they're being put on, every single athlete is different. And yet, what are the components of those tapestries that we want all athletes to be exposed to? And so then on this next slide, you can then populate the other ones as well, is trying to look at athlete development pillars. So again, there you see from top to bottom, technical, physical, mental, and life, that yes, they are distinct, and yet their impact on every part of that young athlete's journey. So about how they train, how they learn, how they adapt to new circumstances, how they adapt to new training loads, how they recover, and overall performance. You cannot extricate, you cannot separate one from the other. You cannot cherry pick. And if you do, I might say at your peril and at the possibility of losing out on this holistic athlete development, which is essentially grounded in human development.
Right. No, that's awesome, Vicki. Thank you. And I love those kind of analogies. And I love the tapestry one, because if you're unraveling one piece of that tapestry, it's more than just that little piece.
Whoa, exactly. Yeah, good point, Suzanne. I mean, you can build it, but also, holy cow, you know that thing with the thread and the sweater, and you think, I'm just going to get that one, and all of a sudden you've lost your arm off your sweater. Yes, I know that. I know that for sure.
No, that's awesome. Thanks so much on that, Vicki. And then I think where we're going to go now is talk a little bit more about the Swimming Canada Athlete Development Matrix, and just popping up on the screen now on what makes up the mental and life skills within the Swimming Canada Athlete Development Matrix. So you'll see on the slide in front of you on the left, we've got the mental skills that talk about the positive attitude, motivation, goal setting, the emotion identification and regulation, self-regulation, attention and focus, reducing errors. So those are some of the key skills on the mental side that we have built into the athlete development matrix. And then on the life skill side, as Vicki alluded to, and we're going to dive quite a bit deeper into this one, the social and emotional learning skills. And there are 5 core competencies that we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth, but those are around the self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, responsible decision making, and relationship skills. So those 5 core competencies are so crucial in the life skill realm. And then a little bit more kind of the generic are the career in sport and the role transition. So transitioning out of sport, and what does that look like? Because that absolutely is something that's really important for our athletes in that life skill space. Travel, knowledge, and safety. What does that look like? Media, nutrition and hydration. And you'll see we've got nutrition and hydration in the life skills, but it's also in the physical capacities pillar. So we really, while they're both important, we do have them in both sections of the athlete development matrix because they're important in different ways within life skills and within the life skills portion. So one of the things, Vicki, that as people are looking at the life and mental skills that we developed within our athlete development matrix, they were written from the athlete perspective. Can you tell me a little bit about our thought process and why we got there, how and why they're written from that athlete perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could maybe just ask those that are on listening to us right now, just in the chat box, how many people have actually heard of social emotional learning in a sport context? And just a simple yes or no would be dandy if you could plunk that in. Just while I'm answering this next question, Suzanne, I'm always curious around what people have come across in their own path, whether it's through sport or in their own family context and so on. That would be awesome. So yeah, this idea of athlete perspective, our first version of the athlete development matrix from Sport for Life was really, again, the first kick at the cat, so to speak. I should change that analogy. I hate to think about kicking a cat. So our first wash, how's about that? And what it described were some attributes, but the waters got a little bit muddy because some of them started to sound like information provided to the coaches as well, like this is what a coach should do. So the social emotional learning, part of it came from, how do you know it's changing? Now, from a technical, tactical, or the physical capacity, that's often very easy, particularly in your sport where there are measures of time. No one's going to argue with the stopwatch or the timing device. Strength, speed, proficiency within a particular stroke. Those are concrete. Those are non-negotiable. But when we start thinking about life skills, and Suzanne mentioned the 5 core competencies, let's just take responsible decision making. How do you measure that? What's the stopwatch you put on that one? What's the yardstick you put on that one? And that instantly can give pause to go, I'm not sure. Or this is the way I do it, and this is the way somebody else does it. So instead of putting the responsibility entirely on the coach around this, what Suzanne and I did is we've pulled from the literature around these core competencies in social emotional learning, and the vast majority of the literature has been coming out of the education sector. And so in schools, how can we help teachers understand the importance of social emotional learning, and how can they create their own metrics? And we wanted the swimmer to, over time, starting as young as possible, to start taking responsibility and become aware of some of those expectations of their own development. And so then when it's positioned in the athlete development matrix, and I'm not sure, Suzanne, would the people who are listening to us right now, would they have had access to the athlete development matrix and sort of see the written word? Yes.
Yes.
So then when we think about it, as Suzanne described on an earlier slide, these are the observations. So again, if we come back to that responsible decision making, as a coach, we can all attest to athletes that have made a better decision or a more poor decision when it comes to showing up on time for practice. If their kit bag or their training bag is filled with all of the right things to get them through practice and perhaps the rest of their day, whether it's at school or back into the workplace. So there are concrete markers that are provided within the athlete development matrix, which the intention was to make it easier for coaches and those people viewing the athlete development matrix to go, yes, I see that, or no, I don't see that. And perhaps then it gives anchors to what kind of experience and environment can the coach provide to get the athlete to tap more into their own exploration of this and to provide feedback. So we really do want the athlete to, as I say, take responsibility for their own development in this aspect, much like every other aspect of athlete development. So on this slide, then, I think we've created as well that athlete perspective that not only helps the athlete, but directly, I'm going to stop saying indirectly anymore, because I think this athlete development matrix, when it's phrased this way from the athlete perspective, it gives parents very concrete ideas about how to support their child in the support in their sport, as opposed to getting mixed messages about, the parent might think one thing and then the coach or the club is saying another thing. Getting parents all behind on the same kind of information. It does, as we've already alluded to, talked about how coaches can, not telling them specifically what to do, but then giving them some latitude around those. What are the experiences I want my athletes to have so they move from A to B in these particular manners? From a club perspective, this is again where club decisions around making a decision whether or not these kinds of life skill development, if they are valued, then it will start to appear within the club's culture. And what I mean by that is, and again, I'll pull an example from another team sport that I've worked with, is that oftentimes in youth development, so let's say between the ages of 11 to 16, apart from chaos happening in the young growing child with all these things, clubs will often get very fixated on their outcome at a competition. So winning becomes of utmost importance at the expense of youth development in all of these areas. Now, some of these youth I've known, experienced through that these athletes might be superb technicians, incredible physical specimens at the age of 14. And so they are often selected over and over again. From a social point of view, they can be a bully. They can create a lot of grief for the coach. Their parents sometimes are nested within that adversarialness as well. And so I ask coaches in those circumstances, you might have picked a winner in one way, but are there any drawbacks in having that athlete where you haven't been able to influence some of their behaviors? So this is, again, putting it on the not on the shoulders of the athlete, but from that athlete's perspective. That was the intention from that.
No, I think that's really great. And another just example is you were talking about your example there that kind of jumped out to me just from having gone through Club World with 3 swimmers. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about all of the social emotional learning, but the self-management piece really kind of jumped to me. And the example that I came to about sometimes it's not always about performance, and a team travel trip. right? Where the kids are traveling for the first time with the team. Mom and dad are staying home. They're in a hotel room with 3 or 4 other people. And performance might not be what is the positive outcome at the end of this. It might be about that self-management and what can they learn and the observations that come out, and that you go in with, yes, okay, you're going to get the best performance you can, or technical delivery, or whatever that might be, but that self-management in itself might be a really important objective or goal from a team travel trip.
Yeah.
So that was just an example that jumped to my mind as you were talking there.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, because that's such a splendid example, Suzanne, where their first travel trip without parents, what are the expectations of those young athletes on that trip? And hopefully expectations are built in for them that go beyond what they do in the pool.
Yeah.
And that sometimes, again, coaches might be under certain pressures thinking, oh my goodness, this is a group of first timers. I wonder how they're going to perform in the pool. But how do they perform as ambassadors for your club, as members of your club? And that is to be valued equally, if not more, in those developmental years. So that again can become, I think, a fascinating topic. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that was great. And so then if we carry on, and we're going to just dive a little bit more into some of the work as we looked at the life and mental skills and executive functions. So we talked a lot about executive functions when developing the life and mental skills. Can you talk to us a little bit more about executive function and what influence that might have on a young swimmer? Yeah,
and so these executive functions actually underlie the development of social emotional learning. They're sort of the basic ABC building blocks from the time of birth up until about the age of 6, 7, 8. The vast majority of our executive functions have a strong start of their development. And these ones underline, in fact, this quote that I've got midway through this slide: success in school and in one's career requires creativity, flexibility, self-control, and discipline. And that diamond is Adele Diamond, not the singer, but Adele Diamond from University of British Columbia. So one of our own is a world-leading researcher in this, and she has lots and lots of information to tell us that the roots of this exist within those first handful of years of a child's life. And sport, she's a super big fan of sport, because sport has this wonderful environment that's filled with all kinds of complexities and interactions with others, trying to follow instructions, trying to do this and not attend to that. She thinks it's a wonderful environment to invoke development of executive functions, which then sets the stage for those social emotional learning core competencies. So a little bit more on executive functions. There's 3 of them, and there's working memory. So working memory is, if I tell you you have to carry out and conduct a certain number of steps to execute a task, if you imagine a group of 4-year-olds, how many steps could you give them before they would forget what's next? And an example that's often given is, if you imagine those 4-year-olds coming into a classroom and it's been cold outside, you tell them, take your boots off, take your coat off, hang your coat up in your cubby and put your boots underneath your cubby. Well, that's 4 different steps. And some 4-year-olds can maybe only get to 2. Okay, I've taken my boots off and my coat off, and now I'm going to the reading carpet. And whereas as we get older, we can attend to all 2 more. That's working memory. The cognitive flexibility is how well you can think about fitting things in different environments. And so cognitive flexibility is being able to listen to different voices, different instructors, different teachers, different coaches, and be able to respond to those different environments that they're put in as well. And the third one is this self-regulation or inhibition control, about, controlling impulses, being able to be aware of an emotion or feeling that is arising in you, and making a decision to act one way, or speak one way or another. And so that little link at the bottom, CIRC, our Sport Information Research Center, asked me to write a little article on it. So there is some of the development of that and its context that's brought out within that. But these are early development pieces. And then if we go to the next slide, this is, again, these are just sort of common things that the young child is having to process when they step into a particular environment. All things are happening around them. There's other people, there's social circumstances, and then they're being asked to go through a set of experiences, whether it's following instructions, whether it's something they are being asked to do on their own, and how well they can attend to those things is part of their own development. So even the youngest of young are have the potential for development. And certainly when we think about youngsters that have experienced deficits or adverse events within their upbringing, that too can create obstacles for some of that development. So executive functions set that stage for social emotional learning skills.
And so with that, are we born with executive functions?
No, we are not. And this slide attempts to, in a very sort of cartoon graphic point of view, where we've got age across the bottom, and then development on the y-axis, the one that's going up the left side of it, and then the red banners are reflecting the different stages that have been addressed within Sport for Life's long-term development pathway, and where are they developed. And so what you will see very quickly, by about the age of 6, how much development has occurred. And now again, development in those rich environments that allows the child to explore, develop, and have appropriate boundaries, have appropriate learning experiences, and so on. But no, we are not born with them. And it's important that not only within our family unit, but also within our sport environments, and as well as within our educational environments, wherever the child spends time in their life during these years, I think have a responsibility to contribute toward the child's development, at least to be aware of it. And what are they doing within their programming, within their places, to support that child's development?
No, that's so interesting. And I think within our sport, a lot of clubs, swimmers won't be coming into those club programs until they're, that's 6 years old. So much of that has taken place. But we see in that graph, there is that lift. So there is that space for more to happen, where I think that's where we can influence and really take advantage of kind of getting more, I guess.
Yes, and you've just poked my brain with something here, Suzanne, that again, you're right. You don't, as a sport within the club, you don't see children until after the age of 6, typically. And so that doesn't mean that if there's detection of deficits or slower development or not appropriate development as expected, it's not a too bad, so sad, it's all done. These are incredibly malleable. And so it's not a one and done. And so these are opportunities then through a club that has a dialed in set of coaches and a dialed in culture, that regardless of those wee ones that are coming into your club as first timers, that they too will all get a chance to continue to develop.
Perfect. No, that's great. And then I think we're going to kind of move on into the social emotional learning. So we've talked about executive functions are those building blocks for social emotional learning. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And we're going to dive into a little bit deeper on what the SEL skills are and how coaches might be able to use those.
For sure. And so this is, and people can read this for themselves. And I got a bit ambitious with my underlining around what I thought was important coming out of this. But this is how social and emotional learning is defined. And so it's about the idea of acquiring knowledge and attitudes and skills that become part of their own toolkit around helping them understand as youngsters, understanding their own emotions, being able to identify where they want to be, what they want to achieve, and understanding that they can make a plan. Amidst all of that, there is a huge piece about this social relatedness. And as a brief aside, it's one thing that really worries me about COVID is the removal of children, globally from their own cohort. And I think loss of learning subject matter is one thing, but loss of social cohesion opportunities, again, is something that I know sport is such a mecca for kids to get together and be with each other, and this is a huge piece as well. So, learning how to be with others, and it's not about being compliant, but it's about being able to listen to others, understanding from someone else's perspective, and sport again, under the right kind of leadership and support from a coach. When a coach can point that out in a training environment about when one athlete has helped another athlete, has listened well, I mean, those are golden moments, and that becomes part of their learning. So that's sort of that grounding piece around what this is and how it equips that youngster going forward.
Perfect. And so I'm going to just pull up the next slide, which talks about the SEL, the core competencies. So interested for the coaches, as you are seeing this slide on the 5 core competencies, if you think about what one is of most interest to you, what would you like to dive a little bit deeper into with our time here? We're going to talk about a couple of them, but really interested in, from your perspectives, which one are you interested to know more about? Because I think what we would like to do is talk about these particular core competencies from a swimming context. What does it look like within your clubs, within your programs, and how might we do that? So when we think about the SEL examples, so again, if you just kind of think about that and throw that into the chat box, and Vicki and I have a couple, I think, that we want to focus on, but very interested in if there's one, we don't want to miss it if it's something that's really of interest to you. So if you want to pop that into the chat box. But when we think about the SEL examples, we want to think about you as a coach, a technical rep, leader, the value of the SEL skills, and to value them equally on the technical, tactical side, and that what is the positive impact that's going to happen from that. So as we talk about these skills, do you recognize them in your athletes? And as Vicki just said, do you praise it? Is it something that that you acknowledge and let a swimmer, an athlete know what you would like to see? And what we're going to do in these next 5 slides, and again, I'd like to focus more on the ones that are of most interest to you, are look at the examples of the core competencies. Think about how you would have this be used within the context of your club. And again, the questions that we're using have been validated for those swimmers in that 7 to 8 years old up to the 17, 18. So within that club program. So I see we've got self-management has come up as one of those options, which is great because that's one that we wanted to talk about for sure.
And oh, sorry, Suzanne, I was
Yep.
interrupting there. I was just going to add to what you were saying is that, so with the PDF that Lindsay's kind enough to have posted down below, we've got these examples embedded in the presentation. So we likely are not going to have time to go through all of them. But if you're curious, they are there and for you to look at. And these are the kinds of questions that have been, as Suzanne mentioned, they have been validated so that we can ask children and adolescents between the ages of 7 up to about 18. We can ask them these questions and they can answer them on these 5-point Likert scales, where 1 might be, not at all, and 5 is all the time. You can get a collective sense of where they are at around these individual core competencies. So Dan, thank you for your recommendation or desire to look at self-management. Now we're looking there. And so within each of these slides, it gives a little bit of a definition around, well, what do we mean by self-management? Because language does become important. I'm sure without showing the definition from the science, all of us could kind of, muddle our way through and come up with a suitable definition. Yet this is really kind of very laser precise around what it is. So self-management, the ability to regulate one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors effectively in different situations. Now, pause for a moment, and who wouldn't want that as a coach for their athletes? I mean, those are just, we want that. We want that not an every once in a while behavior. We want that to be a routine behavior. So this includes things like managing stress, controlling impulses, motivating oneself, setting and working toward achieving personal and academic goals. Now that's again that academic one, but we could also add in there sport performance. Without a shadow of a doubt, we could. So here are 3 questions that one could ask your athletes, given within that validated age range, asking them, how often do you stay focused on the same goal for more than 3 months at a time? And I don't know if coaches who are out there, if you can think of athletes that you work with right now, can you imagine what some of your athletes might say? Always? Never? Some of the time? And it gives you an indication of where they are at, because the older, the more developed that athlete becomes, you would want that ability to stay focused on a goal to become really sticky. And you want that then, because planning ahead for more than 3 months, you want that to expand. Another question that comes out, if you fail at an important goal, how likely are you to try again? And that one, sometimes these questions can actually be good discussions with your athletes, perhaps one-on-one, and even in a group. Do not be shy. These are not sort of hidden agendas. As a coach, you want to show value. It's not simply that it's a once in a while kind of survey item. That is, if you talk about these things, then they become much more normalized, and the athletes start to expect that from you. So it's not just about how they technically perform, how they physically perform, but my goodness, my choices and my behaviors matter just as much. And then one of the other samples, when you are working on a sports skill that matters a lot to you, how focused can you stay when there are lots of distractions? This is a brilliant question, because oftentimes when I will start with that one, first of all, what I will say is, do you have a skill that matters? Now tell me about your distractions. What are the things that are flying and dodging through your brain, through your visual space? And that becomes cool. That's a fun one. Suzanne, you were going to say something.
I was. Well, and I think this question I think about, and I go back to my team travel description. A swimmer may go in and it's a team travel trip and they have a goal of whatever that might be at that meet. I want to achieve this time. I want to make finals. I want to do whatever that might be, whatever they've kind of set up. And the distractions that come on a team travel, are they, can they eat properly? What are their teammates doing? Do they go to sleep when they should? Are they up till, 2 a.m.? And then what does that performance look like the next day? And how can they avoid those distractions and stay focused on what they need? And so to me, this self-management one really resonates when I think about, and again, I'm just thinking of the one example with regards to team travel, but I can see so much learning that could happen in that type of an environment.
Yeah, and you're right, spot on. There's so many things that the more time you spend with the athletes. So there's those discrete times when you're in your home base where they'll come to the pool and so on, those moments. But when you go traveling, you are with them for much longer periods of time, which include non-swimming. And so you get to see them when they're having a meal together, when they are checking in at a hotel. There's all kinds of moments that as a coach you can observe. And it's not so much about the judgment, but it's about stoking one's curiosity about why one athlete might behave one way or say something compared to another. And what is that endpoint goal that one is aiming for in developing your humans first and then developing the athlete and swimmer?
No, that's perfect. So I think we'll jump over social awareness. We're not going to spend a great deal of time on that one, but as we've noted, it is in the PDF, so those questions are there. But I think where we're going to go to next is relationship skills, because I think this one is really interesting for me. And I think for coaches, that first question that's there really resonates. But I'm going to throw it over to you and maybe talk about the definition, and because that first question I think is a really interesting one. Yeah,
and that is you're so welcome, Dan. Yeah, and there's more to it as well. And again, I'll invite anybody who has either I'm curious. Again, one of the drawbacks of these online platforms is I'm so accustomed to speaking to real faces in front of me, and I don't even get to actually see your faces here at all. So I have no idea how any of this material is coming across to you. So Suzanne and I would love to know, is this, to this point in time, has this been informative for you, or there new nuggets for you? Does it seem too much like hocus pocus? Is it not clear? Anything and everything would be welcome on that. So, and so this idea of relationship skills, in fact, Suzanne, the opening of your presentation, which you did here as well as at the launch of this, was to very clearly identify the nature of the partnerships that were huge in making contributions towards the development of this athlete development matrix. And that is something that underlying partnerships are quality relationships. And quality or rewarding relationships do not mean that we always share the same opinions. In fact, a robust relationship can tolerate differences of opinions. Whether it's across, diverse ideas, diverse individuals, letting curiosity be your lead. That if someone does not agree with you, and I've had to do this a ton myself, is just if someone doesn't agree with what I'm saying and makes it very clear they do not agree, that instead of getting my feathers ruffled about that disagreement, to become curious about their perspective. And that leads to a relationship that is under, whether the literature talks about psychological safety, but I can trust that individual to be honest with me and not go along with me simply because that's what I've said. And that can happen if people have a position of power and so on, that people might be afraid to speak to something different. So the idea of individual and development of relationship skills, developing communication, being able to listen, cooperating with others, the very interesting one as well, especially with adolescents, resisting inappropriate social pressure. I don't know if that invokes something for coaches. Again, that's just a wealth of storytelling opportunities. Negotiating conflict constructively. And oftentimes conflict in a sport environment might be suffocated too early. And if there's a conflict between athletes, between athlete and coach, can we cultivate an appropriate environment for conflict to be discussed and collectively come up with what's next? Seeking and offering help when needed. This is another huge piece. A lot of sport, again, in general, this isn't speaking to swimming, is very self-serving. You know, it's about the individual athlete beating the tar out of everybody else and everybody, oh yeah. No, I mean, even swimming has a team culture. And so to what extent does the swimmer contribute to that building of a team culture, that one can lean on each other when necessary, seek support, knowing when to ask for help and when to go at it? So those are all pieces around relationship skills. And those are, holy smokes, I mean, when we think about what happens to athletes post-athlete life and moving into careers, in the literature, in the business place, in the workplace, in the career place, many times, if not all the times, it's athletes become incredible candidates in these places because of their relationship skills that they've had to navigate, either with their teammates, with coaches, whether they're great coaches, whether disagreeable coaches, all of those kinds of things. Relationship skills have been terribly important.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so agree. And I think, you know, the understanding the coach's point of view, I think that question, asking athletes that and having them think about that, you know, I think it's really valuable. And I love the second question as well, is complimenting others' accomplishments, you know, because that is building that trust and that relationship with teammates. So I think that's such an important one.
Yes.
And then, yeah, the last of the 5 core competencies we're going to look at it, and you and I have spoken about this one a fair bit as well, is that responsible decision-making one. And I think, you know, that ability to make constructive and respectful choices about personal behavior, social interactions. You know, I think of you know, my kids coming up through the swimming world and choices that they had to make with regards to their swimming, you know, are what did it mean? And it meant something different for each of them. But it was, you know, am I going to that party on Friday night when I have to be at the pool at 5 a.m. the next morning? And so I think all of that comes into that responsible decision-making piece. There's way more to it, but that again, just an example that comes to mind.
Yeah, exactly. And much like what you're doing, Suzanne, you know, like when you read something like this, it reminds you of something that has happened for you. And I don't know if there's any coaches right now who would, you know, who have that same kind of experience going on for yourself right now, going, yeah, I remember an athlete that, you know, made this particular decision and this was the consequence. And would the same experience unfold now if you think, for instance, let's take your example, Suzanne, where the athlete makes a decision to go to a party, and whatever the consequence is of that party, whether let's say the performance was fine or not so fine, as a coach, finding out about going to the party when there might have been a curfew, what opportunities do coaches have, or would a coach consider that an opportunity to address responsible decision making with calling it out? And so what do you think, Suzanne, or anybody else who's listening? I mean, what would you do in that circumstance? Because
Yeah,
this is when it comes to life.
It really does, and we'll watch for some chat to come through, and just I think from my perspective, it's as I watched my swimmers grow, when they're at home, and the home environment is going to play such a role, the ownership. So how much a swimmer owns their sport as opposed to the parents owning it, I think that really comes into play. I think watching some of my swimmers, it was they owned it. So if they made that decision, then whatever the impact, they were living that. It was theirs. And while there may be a conversation around it, it's like, okay, so if you make this decision, and then the next day, okay, so you made that decision last night, what was the impact? And having those types of conversations. Because again, I think the life skill pillar specifically is something so much that there's so much of it that's going to come from the home as well as at the pool. And so I think, that watching that grow, I think for me was, as a parent, was interesting to watch how that evolved. And how often do you follow directions during training? How often, do you unload the dishwasher when you've been asked? Like, I think there's so many parallels that you could look at, and what are the consequences of those? So, so no, very, very interesting. Nothing's come in the chat from our coaches on this one, but an interesting conversation for sure.
Yeah, and I appreciate your comment, Teresa, about finding the information useful. And you're right. I think COVID, again, one of those other impacts, not alone on the sport, but on the sport community, I think has had huge impact. When I think about one other remark, and this was something that I've done when I've taken this into a workshop into the education setting, and this is something as well that comes out in the literature, is that the social emotional learning skills of students or of athletes and their progression is directly related to the social emotional learning competencies of coaches and educators. And so this is something that, now this again gets a bit tricky, because it's, as coaches, this is, again, tapping into your continual learner vibe, that for you to go through each of those core competencies and, out of curiosity, answer them on behalf of yourself. And what has been shown with this is that, and they've actually tested this out, is that you can come up sort of with a cursory grade or score of social emotional core competencies for the instructor, the teacher, the coach, and it directly relates to that cohort of children or youth that they are working with. So if again, coming from the literature, if a teacher has less developed social emotional learning skills, the children or youth in that classroom have a bit of a ceiling put on them that they can't, and their stress levels through different kinds of measures are quite high. And if there's this called stress contagion thing, that so if the teacher is feeling angst, the students are feeling a bit of angst, and that happens in our sporting environments as well.
Right.
And this is not intended to be, judgmental. But again, I think what it does is it shines a very bright light on how can we help coaches deliver the best possible experiences, create those rich environments for our athletes. And does the club support coach development in that way? We want to cultivate social emotional learning skills in our athletes and coaches, and it's not one or the other.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thanks, Vicki. I think, again, just a different perspective where we've really been talking about these social emotional learning from the athlete perspective, but flipping that over and to say, equally important is where is the coach on this continuum, and that they can keep learning and growing those social emotional learning competencies, and how important and beneficial that would be to the whole culture as well. I think that's really a really great point. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
One.
Yeah. And Dan, I agree with you completely, is that when a coach recognizes something, and it might be recognition of, one or two athletes, but in that entire environment saying, I see how you helped each other. I see how you sorted that one out. And I want to applaud that. Thank you. It doesn't take a lot, but it does take the eyes to see it. Yeah. And so I think coaches' eyes, it's a bit like giving a broader horizon to look at, when we're often very fixated on like I say, the technical, tactical, and the physical development. These are other ways in which we can just as easily give a shout out to, and it doesn't have to be long-winded.
No, that's absolutely awesome. Thanks. And thanks, Dan and Teresa, for the comments that came in. Really helpful, I think. So we're coming close towards the end of our presentation. So just bringing this slide back up, because we really just thought it was an important way to kind of tie it back in again, and just to show the importance of the life skill as a building block, and again, that four-legged table, each one of them has their place and is so important. So I think that was an important, just to kind of bring that back around. And then lastly, when we think about outcome, and Vicki has talked about this kind of throughout, I've mentioned it a few times, is that idea of developing the social emotional learning will create those people first, the athlete second, and the swimmer third. And I love the quote that's included there is great coaches are humanitarians. They care for the athlete as people first and athletes second. And that this is paramount in gaining respect. And I just kind of leave you with a final kind of way to pull this all together is, I've spoken about, and a lot of you who do know me quite well, know that I had three swimmers, and those three swimmers, are 28, 26, and 23 now, and the 23-year-old is still swimming. But the importance of the coach in my swimmer's life through their journey, especially through those adolescent years, through those high school years, and the impact that those coaches had on developing my swimmers as people, is just so crucially important, because I think they really cared about them as people. When my daughter first went to university, I think in her first year of university away, she called Tom and Jocelyn on the phone more than she called home. And that was that relationship of that coach. There was so much respect that had been built there and grown there, and such a comfort level that it was about her continuing to develop as a person. And those coaches had such an important role there. And at the same time, she was married a year ago, less than 50 people at the wedding because of COVID. And at that wedding, 3 coaches were at that wedding. So of the 48 people, 30 plus who were family, the other 15 people a good portion of them were coaches. And that impact is so important. And I think for my sons, the relationship with their coach, it wasn't just about swimming and the performance. It was about music. It was about movies. It was about life outside the pool. And as a parent looking back on that, the lessons that my kids learned in the sport will take them so much further than just the sport itself. And that was because of the coach and the ability to create that social emotional learning and those experiences. And so from my perspective, we definitely lucked out on the coach, on the coaching, because it just provided so much benefit. So I just kind of tie that in, again, taking off the Swimming Canada hat and putting on the mom hat and just seeing the impact that you as coaches can make in a swimmer's life. It's just can be forever, right? Like that is just something that will last them a lifetime.
Yeah. Oh, I so appreciate that that reflection, Suzanne. I think that's, especially during COVID, but even without COVID, sport is that very, very unique environment, and and that impact of coaches. And this in particular, I think, is a cornerstone of it. I remember being in several different workshops that if you were ever asked, think about either, a coach or a teacher that you really admire, and you talked about, what was it that made them so special and so strong in your memory? Not a one would have come up with, that coach just taught me the most wicked backstroke. It was about their character, about this is a coach that challenged me. This is a coach that understood me, that pushed me, that supported me, that had a great sense of humor. Those kinds of things, when we all take a moment and reflect back on that, think of the power of those memories that are formed and how they're formed.
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Vicki, I can't thank you enough for having this conversation with me again. I think I always learn something as I come away in talking with you. And we've looked at this for a couple of years now, and every time we talk there's always a new nugget. So I really appreciate you being here with me today, and really appreciate Swim Ontario for reaching out and asking us to be part of this. And I think for all the coaches on the line, really just encouraging you to, if you haven't logged into the learning management system, to look at the athlete development matrix. Please do so. It is there. It's a resource, I think, really important. And there is another resource. The Aspen Institute has some great resources on this topic as well. And we can certainly get that information to Lindsay to get out to the group also. But just, thank you to Swim Ontario and for bringing us and having us speak to you today. And as always, thank you to you, Vicki.
Yeah, and right back at you, Suzanne. Always a pleasure. And the learning cuts both ways for sure. And I'm not sure if there are. I don't mean to badger people who are on the line, but hey, if you got any comments or questions, or it's not too late. If you'd like to ask a question, we're still here. And but again, I don't mean to, as I say, I don't want to badger you. I know you've probably got other things you're waiting for.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Vicki. It's been great, and I have appreciated the couple of comments that have come through. I think they've been really valuable. But as you say, we definitely are interested in feedback, and I think if you have any feedback, I'm not sure of the feedback mechanism that Swim Ontario has. I'm sure there is something, but directly about this particular presentation, please feel free to email me as well, and provide any feedback that you may have on how we could do a presentation like this and make it more impactful and more helpful, as we're trying to not only give you content, but give you that context, which I think is the really important thing. And I've just, I think, thrown my email into the chat box as well. So if you have any questions, by all means, you know, feel free to write down that email address. I think I typed it in there correctly, but it's spaulins@swimming.ca, and would be really happy to take any feedback or comments that you may have after the fact.
That's awesome, Suzanne.